I'm going to talk to you guys about another tool or thing that I use in order for me to learn Spanish or future languages. I learned 16 to 20 of the most common verbs that I use in my own language, which is English. The verbs will be like to be, to see, to walk, to eat, to leave. Once I learn or memorize those common verbs I use in my own language, I translate the verbs in English, and that was the only time I really translated things to make it make sense, because certain verbs, it was just too different, right? Some verbs, when you look at it, they kind of look like English. Some verbs are completely different. So I had to look it up, and I learned how to conjugate those verbs in a certain way. I'll have another video that will teach you guys how I learned how to conjugate the verbs. They have these small little pointers that actually helped me learn how to conjugate the verbs in Spanish. It made it much more easier. It made it very visual to learn how to conjugate the verbs in Spanish. And I really, really love the technique. So now, once you learn how to conjugate those verbs, that's the only time I say you have to memorize, because you have no choice. You don't know anything about the language. So you go over there, you memorize the 16 to 20 verbs that you're most familiar with in your own language. The verbs that you use all the time. Like, to be, you're using that all the time. I am. I walk. These are the verbs that you use all the time. So once you learn that verb, what you're going to do is you're going to try and use it right away. Just like children. Children, once they learn something, they go ahead and then they just try it. And I do have a tutor, and I'm going to talk about a tutor, how to get a tutor on other videos. But basically I'm saying, once you learn a certain verbs, you go on a class or you find your nearest Spanish person, and right away you try to strike a conversation with the verb that you just learned. And that's what I did when I learned estar, which I went and I started a conversation with my teacher. Estar, soy bien, estoy bien, and I tried to use the word, and obviously she corrected me because I was wrong at that time. I didn't know what the heck I was talking about. But eventually, after the person corrects you enough, your brain does this thing where it just gets it. It gets it, okay, you're wrong. Eventually, your mind just fixes it for you. And once it fixes it, you'll be able to use that verb. So that's what I did. I learned those verbs. I kind of mastered those verbs. And one more thing about verbs when you conjugate it that you're going to learn is that some of the verbs in Spanish are irregular. It means that like the way it's conjugated does not look at all like the to be version or the original version. So those ones, what I did is I just conjugated them wrong while speaking to my teacher, and eventually she just corrected me over and over, because if the verb doesn't even look like the original version, there's no way for a person to even have the ability to conjugate it. Because what reference do you have? There's not much reference. That's pretty much it in terms of learning the verbs. I hope you guys go out there, and I hope you guys learn how to conjugate the most common verbs that you actually use yourself. Because what we essentially do is we try to speak the way you speak in English and Spanish. It doesn't always work out the same, because certain things like explaining the appearance of an object is completely different in Spanish than in English. You can have things like, that girl is beautiful. And in Spanish, I believe in Spanish is also that girl is beautiful. But there's certain times where it's like completely different. I'll try to remember. I'm not remembering right now. Here's a good example. The blue car. In English, you would say the blue car. So the adjective or the word that's describing the car comes before the word car. But in Spanish, it'll be after. It'll be the car blue. El carro rojo, el carro azul. So that you will learn as you go on, and especially if you have a mentor or a teacher, it will be much more easier for you to learn how to use those combinations together. But the verbs are very, 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 very important. These are action words that you're going to be using in your daily speaking with people, with friends, with family. So I find it very, very important that you focus on learning those verbs, and the only time I'm going to say this is actually memorizing those verbs. Especially if you memorize 20 verbs, you'll be doing very good. All right, guys, I hope you like my video, and like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope to keep making these videos when I'm learning different languages so that people see that it is possible to learn how to speak different languages, especially when it's on your native language.